right, well, let's look at some of the homework for Unit 11, Day 1, right? So we start out, our first question is just finding the limits of a graph, then finding the limits of a graph with infinity. Okay, using the table function, okay, the true and false statements, and then sketching your own graph. Okay, that's not too bad. Let's look at the first. Look at the first question, right? We'll just do the first couple. All right, we're looking at -8 to the negative power. Okay, or to the not to the negative power, to the negative side. All right, we're looking at -8. Coming from the negative side, that's the left side. We're going all the way. We're going to be approaching the y value of -6. From the positive side, right, that's pretty much the same. It'll be approaching -6. Then that means because both values agree with each other, as x approaches -8 from both sides, the y value will approach -6. And the function of -8, the defined point, would be this point right here, which is -3. And then everything else is pretty much the same, right? Okay. Okay, let's get these. Okay, from -1, as x approaches -1 from the negative side, right? So it's from the left side, it'll approach positive infinity. And as it approaches from the positive side, right, it'll approach negative infinity. And that means because they disagree with each other and they approach different places, it does not exist, right? Because it does not approach a single value from both sides. And using the table feature is pretty much just plugging in numbers, right? Shouldn't need any help. Let's look at the first one here. I'm going to see if the function of a equals L, right? That means the limit of when x approaches that a value, that a, which is our x value, will also equal L. Well, let's think about it this way, right? In certain situations, that might be true, right? I'll just see if I can find a certain example. Like if we're trying to find the limits of when x approaches -4, right? That value from the left and from the right side, that value will equal -4. Well, the function of -4 will also, or not -4, will equal 0, will approach 0. Well, the function of -4 will also equal 0, right? So both of them agree with each other. But in other situations, like the first question that we did here, our function of -8 will equal -3, right? But our limit will equal -6. So that will sometimes happen, right? So we'll just put false, and I would just put something like, sometimes happens. But you can pretty much just write anything there. All right. Then we'll sketch sketch the possible graph for a function f of x with the specific properties listed there. Okay. Let's see. Let's start with the first one, right? We have the function of -2 does not exist, right? So we'll look at -2. I'm gonna pick a different color, so go with red. Okay. Function of -2 doesn't exist. The function of 2 equal to 5. Function of 5 is equal to -2. So these are specific points that I have to fill out. Perfect. That means the function of -2, we'll draw an asymptote here, right? So we're saying this value will not exist. The function of 2 will equal 5. We'll draw a dot right there, a point right there. Function of 5 will equal -2, point right there. And then let's look at, so we have this one's checked. Let's look at this one. So the limit as x approaches -4 will equal infinity, but from the negative side, but from the positive side, it'll also approach -infinity. Perfect. So let's look at x approaches -4. That's this value right here. And we know that it'll all approach -infinity. So we'll draw these here. Perfect. But we don't know where these are going to go yet. So let's just leave it as going to -infinity here. Okay, as the limits of as x approaches 2 from the negative side, it will equal 5. So let's look at 2. And it'll approach our 5 value right here. So we'll just connect this, right? And then as it approaches from the positive side, it'll approach 1. So let's draw a hole here, because one x value can't have multiple y values. We'll just connect this here. So these are done. Look at the final one, right? X approaches 5. From the negative side, it'll approach 2. Okay. And then as the limit of x approaches positive 5, it'll also approach 2. Okay. So we can maybe just draw like a negative. Doesn't really matter. And then we'll draw this out, and this will become a hole. We can draw this out, and then we can draw this out, and then we can draw this out. Looks pretty bad, but with some cleanup, that'll be our answer right there, right? And what you have to make sure, on a test, I would go over and double check all of these answers, right? And then what else I would do is I would make sure that every x value only has one y value as an answer, right? Sometimes you might accidentally, draw 2 y values for one x value. So I would go ahead, I'd go from left to right, right? Each x value will pass the vertical line test, right? So each value will only have one y value, right? So we have to make sure that there's a hole here and a hole here. And then I just go over these. I make sure all of these are correct. And let's do that right now, right? F of -2 does not exist. Yep. The function of 2 equals 5. Yep. The function of 5 equals -2. Yep. And then we have -4 from the left side will approach -infinity. From the right side will also approach -infinity. Perfect. We'll have as x approaches 2, that's here, it'll, from the negative side, it'll approach 5. Perfect. From the positive side, it'll approach, -1. We did not see that. Okay. So that would be this one. Let's draw this. This is my eraser. Perfect. Right. That's why you always want to, always want to check your work. Okay. As it approaches, it'll approach -1. Okay. Slight mistake there. Perfect. And then we'll go as x approaches 5. From the negative side equal 2, as it approaches from the positive side equal 2. So that'll be our answer right there. And just as I showed you there, you kind of want to always check your work with this one. Make sure to go over it again during a test. And the rest of these should be pretty easy. So, all right, that's the first day done.